Hey, welcome back. Thanks for joining me for another episode. For those of you who subscribe, I'm sorry it's taken so long to get an episode out, but life is just very busy for me right now between work and everything. But let's move on to this modification here. So in my last episode, I reviewed the Hasbro Nerf Boba Fett blaster, talked about there's a little dimple here on this side that needs to be filled in, which I'm going to do right now with some of my Tamiya plastic putty. This is really the only thing on this side of the gun that needs to be filled in. But moving on to the other side of the gun here is the majority of the hard work. We have lots of screw holes around the gun here. You can see this entire side is just covered in holes for screwing the two halves of the gun together. So same thing, but on this side, because they're so deep, I'm going to start with some paper towel, and I'm just going to shove some paper towel inside these holes to fill in a majority of the space. And then what that will do is it will give me less space that I have to use to fill in my putty. So I've done that on the entire gun here, all the screw holes that I need to. There are a couple left open because of this one, such as the battery compartment. So that's going to be seen, and I also have to sand down this logo here, and I have these that have to be sanded down. There's also one here in this little spot that needs to be sanded. Of course, we have the Nerf logo itself that needs to be sanded right here, and we have some more stamped stuff back here on the handle that needs to be sanded. There's texture here on the gun. We'll see how that works out with sanding. There's also texture around the outside here, so I want to try to leave all that intact. Sanding this, we'll see what happens with that texture, if I can keep it or not, and make the whole thing textured. So I'm just going to go ahead now and start filling in the rest of all the screw holes with putty on top of the paper towel that I had put in there. Once that's been done and dried, just go around the entire gun, and I'm going to start sanding away at all the spots where I filled in with putty, trying to get it as smooth as possible with the rest of the gun. And then I'm going to go through and sand down the Nerf logos and get that as smooth as I possibly can. And I've done the entire gun now. This feels very smooth to the touch. I think I've gotten it pretty well. Gotten all these raised text sanded down, the Nerf logo here. I've sanded down the seams down the middle of the gun, sanded down the seams on the scope, so that when it's painted it'll look solid, not like it's two halves pressed together. Sanded down inside here and in here, and I need to fill those in with some styrene. So I have a sheet of styrene here, 1/4 millimeter. I'm going to cut it to shape and stick it inside these holes to raise it up just a bit so that I don't have this depressed section right here. So I've gone ahead and cut a piece out. I've put some super glue on the back of it, and I'm just going to press this right into place here inside this depressed area on the gun. Doing the same thing on this one, and then of course I've done the same to these two strips here. And these. And then what I will do is I'll go ahead and take more of my putty and fill in just around the areas to try to make it as smooth as possible. So I've taped off the handle of the gun. I'm going to leave the brown that's there. I'm just going to airbrush over that at a later point, but I've taped off the handle. The rest of the gun is all going to be primed with Tamiya primer. Oh, and I've also taped off the scope here. So I've primed the blaster now, then I've filled in with putty again, primed, sanded, filled more putty, primed, sanded, until I can get it as smooth as possible. So multiple layers, but it's looking really nice at this point. There are a couple little sections here that aren't great, but I'm going to use those as damaged areas and just use weathering to damage that up and make it look like it's been hit. So now that I've got this entire gun painted with my primer, I'm going to go ahead and move on to painting the gun with my Army Painter matte black paint. And that has really made this start to come to life now. It's starting to look more like an actual blaster than just a toy weapon at this point. And I really love the sheen of this Army Painter black finish. So at this point, I want to start detailing the gun to make it look metallic like it does in the movie. I'm going to start out using this folk art nickel rub and buff paint. So I've squirted some out here, and I'm just going to use a paper towel and dab some onto a paper towel here. And I'm just going to start smearing and rubbing it along these raised ribbed areas on the front barrel of the gun for starters. Rubs on really nice, gives it a nice metallic look to it. Just kind of keep rubbing it on there, buffing as I go. And it's actually picking up the texture very nicely as well. Got the front of the barrel here. Just go around it in the same direction as the metal would be. The whole front barrel is looking really nice at this point. You can see the texture there. The paint doesn't look completely smooth. It looks a little rough. And I'm just going to go ahead and add a little heavier on these raised areas. I'm going to use the same paint but with a brush and kind of dry brush it onto other areas around the gun just to pick up some of the detail. Give it a rubbed, warm metallic look. So again, just doing it as a dry brush with the same folk art nickel paint. Do some around the scope areas here. Around this area here where we have the knobs to focus your scope and turn on the light. Just adding highlights and details around the scope. Worn look to it. And add some more here in these ribbed areas that go around the barrel, just to pick it up and highlight it, give a little more detail. Then I've got this bronze folk art rub and buff paint, and I'm going to do the same thing, dry brush it over the nickel paint just to give it a slightly different tint of metal. It's not exactly screen accurate, I would say, but it just highlights a little more, just gives it a little bit of a different look. I like how it stands out and just looks like a slightly different type of metal there that's holding the rest of the barrel together. Definitely happy with how this is turning out so far. Then we got the back of the barrel here where I used a little bit of that same bronze color for these like strap areas that go around the gun. Then on the stock here, I'm also going to use the nickel rub and buff paint, doing it with a brush. Just fill this in. This is supposed to be a metal piece here in the back of the handle, or the stock rather. So I'm just going to fill this in and get the raised areas on this little round section here. So there we pretty much have the whole metal portion of the gun done. But there is still a little bit more that I want to do to this, but I love the way this looks. I like the slightly different shade of color you get with the bronze on there on some of the areas of the blaster as well. But next up, I'm going to take some Viejo dark rust wash, and I'm just going to put some rust areas over the barrel of the blaster. There is rust in the gun in the movies. You can see it in photos of Boba Fett. He's got rust around the barrel. So I'm just going to start going around it and adding Viejo dark rust and just picking up areas to add more texture and more weathering and a more battle-worn looking gun. I'm also going to dab a little extra rust around some of the areas, just using a sponge, try to pick up some spots just to give it a little more oomph to the rust and color, just make it pop a little bit more, look more worn and battle weathered. And there we pretty much have it completed. I'm happy with the way this looks, and I think I'm done as far as the metal portion of the gun goes. Definitely you can see all the texture in those raised areas, texture on those like straps that go around the gun. The back here looks really nice as well. Then I'm just going to go ahead and pull off my tape here that covered up the plastic on my scope. Pull out it from the front end. And you can see through the scope, and there's the light. No light leaking on the outside of the scope either. So I'm going to move on to the ammo cartridge here. I've primed it, painted it with the Army Painter Black Primer. Then the Nerf rounds just go inside this cartridge here. And I'm going to go ahead and use the bronze folk art. I want to give the cartridge a different color than the rest of the gun, just once again like it's a different type of metal that the cartridge is made out of. I'm just going to lightly dry brush over this just to give it a slight metallic sheen to it, and again this bronze colored sheen. However, just go around the edges, pick up the highlight of the detail, do the bottom here. And there we've got the ammo cartridge, and I really like the way this is looking as well. Load it up with some Nerf rounds. And then I painted the inside of the blaster here as well. Did a little weathering and detailing, picking up some of the little things inside the area here, and then I just pop in the cartridge and close her up. So with that being done, I'm going to go ahead and remove all of the tape from the stock here that I had covered up to protect it while I was painting the rest of the gun. And you can see I've got the stock here. They did a good job with the stock. I like how they put the wood grain in there. I'm just going to paint this without priming it. And you can see the grain in here. I'm going to do a wash over that to pick up the grain. I've also sanded down the seams on the stock to try to smooth it out as much as possible. And I'm just going to take some Viejo flat earth, and I'm going to go ahead and just airbrush that right on top of the stock here. I just like this color brown. I think it's going to look nice, so that's just what I picked. No particular reason. I'm just going to go ahead and airbrush the entire stock. I've got the whole stock airbrushed now. And I like the way it's looking so far. I like the shade of brown that is for the stock. Now I've gone ahead and I've covered the entire stock with some gloss clear from Tamiya to protect the paint. Then I'm going to go ahead and use some Viejo chocolate brown, and I'm just basically going to do a wash over it to try to get that to pick up inside of all the grains of the wood. And I'm doing a heavy wash on this, so it even kind of stains the existing brown and tones that a little bit. And I'm just going to dab it with some sponge here, apply some more wash with paint, then dab it off with the sponge. That way it leaves it inside the grains, but it also kind of tints the other brown as well. I like the way this is looking so far. It looks like an aged wood. I like the color of it. And I did the handle as well. And seams are pretty well covered up. There's a little bit there, but overall I'm really happy with how this looks. And go ahead and take the rest of the tape off of these areas on the stock here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a little bit of weathering to this now. I like the way this is looking. It looks very much like real wood, much more so than just the plastic stock, which it really is. I'm just going to do some weathering over this now. I'm going to go ahead and start out with some mud pastel and just kind of smear some around, definitely on the ends of the stock where it would kind of be handled more, pushed up against the body more. Adding a little bit of light sand, Tamiya pastel, around some of these edges, highlights, pick it up, make it look like the wood has been worn and scuffed and scraped up. Again, also around the handle here, a little bit around the trigger, then just some more sand pastel around various areas of the stock. So we've got the gun pretty much finished the way I want it to look. I've painted and weathered the stock and the handle and the whole gun. So with this being done and the way it looks, I'm going to call it finished. And it's time to present you with the finished Boba Fett EE-3 blaster.
Hey, if you like watching my videos, please feel free to give them a like. And so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos, click subscribe.